What are some of the things to consider when buying a used car from as far as potentially the other end of the country? Let's discuss. I live in the northeast of Scotland, and the nearest city to me is Aberdeen, which is quite isolated from the rest of Scotland and the whole of Britain. And it's also got a weird economy because we've always had the riches of oil and gas up until now, really. And so it's not the sort of market that really lends itself to being great for bargains. But that is not the main reason why when I buy a used car, I go further afield for it. The main reason is that generally I always have a very specific spec in mind for the car I want. And so to find a used one that has that right spec, the chances are it's never going to be that close to where you live unless you get really lucky. So that just forces you to look further afield. And I hate to say it because I don't really like giving Auto Trader my money. I kind of view them as like the big tech of the car world, and they just seem to have a bit too much of a monopoly on everything, and the prices they charge for advertising cars take the absolute piss in my opinion. But when it comes to a search engine, they are probably the best. And when you want to refine a search for exactly the spec you want, I generally find Auto Trader to be the best one out there. And I always do a nationwide search. But it's not always the right call to buy a car from long distance. And when I say long distance, I mean not local. It could be a couple of hours away or the other end of the country. But I've got quite a lot of experience in buying cars from quite far away, like 8 hours each way in a car type stuff. And so I thought I'd share with you some of the things I've learned from this, because there's quite a lot of interesting points to raise. Some would say it's a really good thing and some would suggest it's maybe not. And if you live in Scotland, this potentially could be of more relevance to you because we are further away from where I think the sweet spot is for buying cars, but also potentially more remote. And just to be clear, if you want the cheapest used car purchase, chances are it's going to be from a private seller. But I don't have a lot of experience with that, so I'm going to leave that pretty much to the side and focus on buying from distance when it's with a used car dealer. And I'm going to give you 10 potential reasons to think about. So buckle up and let's get into it. Okay, bear with me here because I'm going to have to get a couple of obvious points out of the way first. But the price of cars across Great Britain specifically can vary by thousands. And I know that's not groundbreaking to say, but depending on the location and the dealer, yeah, you could literally be looking at a car price local to where you are, and then it's thousands more, thousands less in different parts of the countries. And there's no difference in spec. Yes, as I say, affluent areas and remote locations generally are going to have a premium associated with their pricing for just about anything. So that is not groundbreaking news either. But my experience, generally, I have bought almost all my cars from the northern half of England, so like the Midlands upwards to the border. And I can speculate as to why they might be the cheapest in that part of England, but I would just be speculating, so I'm not going to go there. But generally my experience has been that that has been the sweet spot for getting the best value, but that's also taking into account the distance to travel. So if somebody was selling a car in Penzance, I'm like, that's maybe a little bit far for me to travel to physically get it or for it to get driven up to me. So there is an element of that that comes into it, but generally I find the south to be a bit more expensive than the Midlands and upwards. And so that has been the sweet spot for me. This is obviously a key point with distance buying, but one I really want to emphasize is the main point is that you do not necessarily have to assume that the cost associated or the hassle associated with distance buying is going to fall on you as the consumer. If you are part exchanging, obviously things get a bit easier. And so if you actually wanted to get the dealer to come to your house to drop off your new car, you then just give them your old one and they drive it back. So it's quite a simple logistical endeavor to do that. But in most cases for me, I usually like to sell the car I've got privately or through one of these auction houses, and then buy a car with the money because I'll get more for it usually, and go and buy my car. So in that case, if I was getting the dealer to come to my house to drop off my new car, I will then just give them a lift back to like the bus station or something. That works quite well. Ultimately though, there is a cost associated with them coming to you to bring you the car. And so how that cost is presented can vary. It might just be that they're desperate for your sale and they basically just absorb it into their margins, or they hide it in the price, or there's a price per mile charge, or there's a flat fee. Any of those can be a potential option, and obviously depending on how far away you're buying from, the costs associated with that could vary. Obviously the cost per mile one will be really relevant to how far away you are from the dealer you're buying from, and in my case that's quite often blown out of the water because it's like, oh, it's £1 a mile, and you're going, oh, I'm 300 miles away, you know. I'm like, that's actually 300 miles, 3 times, yeah, that's quite a lot of money. So that one quite often doesn't work for me. But usually if they really want your business, they'll find a way to maybe make it cost effective. Also, if you're buying from a dealership that has like a network of dealers and not just a one shop independent, then potentially that could work in your favour too. For example, if they've got a branch in Manchester and one in Glasgow, you could maybe say, well, you guys internally move the car to your one in Glasgow and then I'll go and get it from there, or the cost of the delivery is from there. You know, there might be some negotiation on that sort of thing. So always check on that. Obviously, it's ideal to test drive a used car before you buy it. But if you're buying from the other end of the country, the chances are you've already negotiated the deal before you're going to travel. So you might not be able to do that. If it's one that you are going to go and get, then you can actually get a company to go and do an inspection on your behalf. There's companies called Click Mechanic, and there's probably other ones out there. I don't know really how good they are, you know, and how much you can trust the inspection. But ultimately, these guys, you basically look for one in the area and they'll basically go and they'll check out the car. As long as that's okay with the dealer, then that potentially could work, and you can get somebody to give eyes on it and then report back to you. So you have a bit more information about the car that's independent before you go. Also, if the dealer can tell you're serious, and there's definitely ways you can make that point, like offering to put a deposit down, or, you know, mentioning things like, I'm without a car just now. That's obviously giving some signal that you desperately need a car, but potentially could affect your negotiating as well. But you can then maybe push to get more stuff done to the car, like a video walk around, and you could also suggest that they throw in a service or an MOT, you know, things that would kind of call their bluff if they were hiding something. And it's not always just about does the engine work and does the electrics work as well. It's proving that the car's got the spec they say it has, because it's quite incredible how many times a car is mis-selling what it actually has on Auto Trader. I have caught this out more times than I care to remember. It's absolutely laughable. Sometimes it's by accident, they just don't realise that they're saying something about their car, they're not. Sometimes it's an automated bit of information pulling in from Auto Trader, and sometimes they're just absolute cowboys. So if you get some sort of video walk around or something, and you get them to like do certain functions, say on the infotainment, to prove that it's got Apple CarPlay and Android Auto or something, that can really tell you a lot about the dealership and whether or not the car is actually what they say it is. But used car dealers probably want to cover their ears for this next point. But essentially, if you want to know what the car's like to drive, and, you know, do you like the infotainment system and how it works and stuff like that, those are the sort of things, again, if you're buying from distance, you can't really check beforehand. So it might be advisable to fake some interest at a local dealership to actually get a test drive or something, so you can figure all that stuff out before you buy the car from distance. Dealerships can be quite helpful actually with planning the logistics. On almost every occasion where I've bought a car from distance, they've been quite helpful with actually telling me what hotel to stay at overnight, because usually I do that if it's far enough away, and, you know, maybe what trains to get, and just giving me lots of tips about how to physically get to them as quick as possible and without any hiccups. But also, they will then arrange to pick you up in the morning and take you back to the dealership. So that's all good stuff, but the key thing for me is that if they are quite helpful with all that kind of stuff, it's a good sign, an indicator about how you might be treated. So circling back to this point about if you commit to buying a car from distance that you've not been able to inspect, and then you get on planes, trains and automobiles to go and get it, and you get there and it turns out they've sold you a turkey, or it's just not as described, or there's some point that you feel that you should be able to negotiate on, bear in mind that because you've done all the travelling and you're there, that your negotiating power could be compromised a little bit, because they're probably thinking, you've come all this way, you want to leave with a car. So it might be more difficult to actually get a better deal in that situation. And certainly if you decide to walk away, they probably won't give you a lift back to the train station. On the flip side, if they're delivering the car to you, and in the case of where I live, that's quite an endeavour, let me tell you, then they are assuming a bit more risk, because you could still walk away from the deal if the car is in fact a turkey. So I would say there's less chance of it being a turkey, because chances are they're not going to want to take that risk. But yeah, ultimately you could still say no, and if that's the case, then that's going to get awkward, because, well, are you going to then give them a lift to the bus station? Probably not. When dealing with dealerships from distance, quite often they don't take you very seriously at first, or in some cases are just complete and utter muppets, and have clearly never seen Pretty Woman.
Big mistake. Big. Huge. You
need to convince them pretty quickly that you're a serious buyer and worth spending time on, because to them, you're just a guy on the phone. You're not a real person yet that's gone into their dealership. And so they will say to you in a lot of cases, oh yeah, you want me to follow up with that information? Yeah, no problem. And then you'll never hear from them again. And if you try to negotiate the price over the phone, having not seen the car, the default answer from a lot of used car dealers will be really defensive, and they'll go, we're not negotiating price until you come and see the car. How do you know that it's not worth this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, right, okay, in some cases I kind of get that point, but also if it's utterly abundantly clear that they are massively overpricing a car that's nowhere near market value, then yeah, okay, they're gonna go, we can charge whatever we want, it's all right, blah, 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 yawn. But essentially, in a lot of cases, it's like, well, I know that there's some negotiation probably to be done and some wiggle room, but I'm not going to travel to Birmingham just to have that conversation. So we need to kind of have this chat now. And if you're not willing to have it, you're potentially just shooting yourself in the foot and missing a sale. I just don't get that. Some dealerships will not do delivery at all, no matter what premium you say you'll pay for it. And the reason for that is that there's too much risk for them. And that's because you can still have right of refusal of the car on delivery. And so they just say, no, we're not willing to take that risk, and they've probably been burned too many times. But I think that's also a good way to vet how confident they are about the cars, because really, if you're selling quality cars and you know the condition of them, would that bother you so much? Would you be willing to take that risk against losing a sale? If they're not willing to do that, that for me is potentially a bit of a red flag, and some just will not do it. And car supermarkets seem to be one of them in some cases. So something to be aware, but the bottom line question you need to ask yourself is, what is your time worth if you have to go and get it? When the deal is done, the dealership will always want the car off their lot as quickly as possible. And if it's month end or quarter end, that matters particularly because it's all about revenue recognition and all that sort of stuff. So be mindful of that if you're looking to buy a car quite near the end of a month or quarter, because they might put quite a bit of pressure on you as per the deal you got to come and get the car. And so if you then are rushed to go and get on a plane or whatever, you might need to pay for premium transport essentially to get there in time. So you've taken delivery of your used car that you bought from distance. A couple of days later, you're driving along and something breaks and you go, oh crap, do I have a warranty? Yes, you do. You've got a wee used warranty with it, and it's probably not the best warranty in the world, but it's probably one that will say that up to a certain point you can go and get things repaired, certain things if necessary. Great, but you're obviously not going to want to be like, okay, so which repair shop do I use? And they're like, you've got to use ours. That's a 600-mile round trip, mate. That's not going to work. So I would just have the conversation in advance of buying the car and say, look, if something goes wrong, can I use a local repair shop, and then just send you the receipts? Very important. I haven't really talked about the private buy situation, and there's a reason for that. It's because I find it probably something that's too risky. Like, I would probably say the rule of thumb for me would be I would only ever travel distance to look at a car to buy it privately if it was either a very special car, and potentially I had a chance to hire a private detective to make sure that the person I was buying from was legit and potentially not an utter scammer, because there's loads of them out there. But generally speaking, I would probably never want to travel more than a couple of hours to go and view a car that was private, and I just haven't really done that. But at least then I could go, okay, I've eaten 4 hours of my day, but it's just too risky for me in a lot of ways to think about buying a car privately, so I just don't do it. You just haven't got any kickback if things go wrong, and that's the bottom line. If you at least buy from a dealership, and you probably want to check out the dealership and make sure that they've got good reviews and stuff, but you do always have some kind of buyer's protection, and that matters. But I hope you found this interesting and useful, guys. I'm sure there'll be a few used car dealers in the comments that tell me everything I've said absolute nonsense. Been there before, but I'm just passing on my experiences. It's not really a case of right or wrong anyway, but I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments and your experiences. And this was not an exhaustive list of points, it's just the ones I could think of. But let me know what you think, and if you enjoyed the video, please give a like. Don't forget to subscribe as well, because there's loads more coming up on the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.